Hi, my name is Lynette Lee, and I am a career specialist here at the East Baton Rouge Parish Library Career Center. Today, I'd like to talk about special resume rules for ex-offenders. As some of you may know, Louisiana is the prison capital of the world, so a lot of our clientele have a criminal record of some sort or other. And they find that this can make the job search very challenging, including putting together a resume while having a criminal record. It can be a bit of a challenge. So today, we're taking a look at the best ways to handle this, overcome these obstacles, and put together a great resume. First, you want to decide what kind of job you want. Trying to write a resume when you don't really know what kind of position you're trying to tailor it to is beyond frustrating. Your first step is to figure out what sort of job you want. You may not need to have a specific job title in mind, but you should at least know what industry you would like to work in. If you are having trouble figuring this out, particularly if you're somebody who's in a situation where you need to change careers, what you used to do for a living is not something you can do anymore, you may need a little help figuring out what you want. The Career Center can help with that. If you call us, we can set you up an appointment to speak with our career coach on a NOVAC. Once you've decided what you'd like to do for a living, your next step is to track down your work history. The most basic, important step of a resume is your work history, where you worked, when, and what you did there. You do need to include the dates that you worked somewhere. If you don't remember, you need to call these companies and find out those dates. If you can't get a hold of the company or if they don't have a record of it anymore, you can talk to the Louisiana Workforce Commission. As long as your work was in the state of Louisiana, LA Works does have a complete record of your work history. If your work was in a different state, you may need to speak to the workforce agency for that state. Or, on a national level, you could try contacting the Social Security office or the IRS, because they know everything. Whatever the case may be, you need to find out your work history, where you worked and when. You're also going to want to add to this list all of your education, all of the schooling that you've completed. In addition to high school, college, vocational school, you're also going to include certifications, such as TWIC or OSHA or NCCER, or if you are a certified pharmacy technician, or if you have a CDL license, or if you're CPR certified. Any sort of educational credential that you've got that you think could be useful in a job setting. Next, you want to write out a list of your best, most relevant skills. This is a key part of preparing to write a resume, especially if you are somebody who has a criminal record. Because in that case, it's very likely that your work history might have some gaps in it, or that you might be changing careers to a different kind of work than what you used to do. In these cases, having a list of your transferable skills, the skills you have that will carry well with you into the next job that you have, this is a very valuable part of your resume. We'll look at some of the specifics of that later as an example of how these skills can really make a resume shine. If you're having difficulty figuring out your skills, talk to the people who know you. Ask them what your skills are. What are you good at? What might you bring to the workforce? You can also check out the transferable skills page on the resumes and cover letters section of our website. There's a list there of transferable skills that might help you jumpstart your ideas. Now that you've figured out what you want and written down what you have to offer, it's time to write your resume. You want to begin by finding a resume template so that you don't have to start completely from scratch in formatting this thing. However, you want to be careful. If you go online and Google resume templates or resume builder, there's a good chance that the website that you find will want to charge you money. Even the ones that say that they're free usually have some sort of fine print where if you want to do anything with a resume, such as save it or print it or email it, they're going to ask for a credit card number. Be careful. You don't want to get taken in by this if you're not willing to pay money for a resume. For free templates, you might want to try Microsoft Word. If you have Microsoft Word installed on your computer, it comes with several free resume templates. You may also try, and I highly recommend, our resume templates. We have a selection of resume templates available for free on the Career Center website. You can download those, customize them, and make them your own. You want to try to match your resume up with the job posting. If you're applying for a specific job with this resume, print out the job posting. Take a careful look at it. What skills are they asking for? What job duties do they say you're going to need? What kind of experience and qualifications do they list? Take what they say and, as much as possible, parrot that back to them on your resume. Put those skills and that experience to the forefront of your resume because you know that's what they're looking for. You want to be specific, but only about the important stuff. So here's what I mean by that. There are some things about your job and your experience and your skills and your education. There's some things that are important. You want to specify those. Don't just say that you trained someone. That's important. Go into detail. What did you train people on? How many people did you train? These are the kinds of details that are going to make an accomplishment more impressive. Don't say that you know how to use a computer or that you know how to use heavy equipment. What computer software do you use? Which items of equipment do you know how to drive? These are the specific details that an employer is going to be looking for. So these are where you do want to be specific. But there's also such a thing as too much detail. If you're breaking down the real details of things that ultimately they don't care about, that's going to make your resume boring to read. So it's not necessary to go into extensive detail about every single part of what you did on every single job you've ever had. That's too much info. Before you write something down on your resume, ask yourself, are they going to care about this? Is there a reason to include this information? Be careful with what you go into detail on and what you don't. You want to make your resume neat and pretty and easy to read. This is crucial. Your resume has to be a pretty document. That sounds really shallow, but it's true. They want to see something that looks like it took effort to make, something that you clearly put a lot of care into creating this document. So you want to make it neat and pretty, and it needs to be easy to read. If it's a giant wall of text, they're not going to bother to read it. You want to make it easy for them to skim and casually scan. The templates that we look at later can help you with ideas for how to do this. Never lie on your resume, but you don't have to tell them everything. So here's what I mean by that. Do not say something on your resume that they can prove is not true. Don't make up a job. Don't put employment dates that are inaccurate. Don't say that you graduated with a bachelor's degree when you actually dropped out 1 year before earning your bachelor's degree. All of these are things that they can prove is wrong once they do a background check on you. Any skill that you say you have, don't lie about those either. If you say on your resume that you're proficient in Microsoft Excel or fluent in Spanish, if that's not true, they're going to find out within the first week of work, and that's going to put you in a bad situation. So don't lie. But you don't have to tell the whole truth either. There's certain things that you don't need to go into detail on. There's certain things that you don't have to mention at all. If you had a short-term job that only lasted a few months and didn't end well, you can leave that off of the resume entirely, and it's fine. If you have education or certifications that are in a totally different field from what you're planning on doing, you can leave that off. You don't have to tell them about that because it's going to look weird if you've got stuff from all over the place. You also don't have to tell them about your criminal record on the resume. That's right, you can leave the incarceration off of your resume entirely. You don't have to mention it there, but at some point, you are going to have to talk about it, because at some point it's going to come up on the background check if nowhere else. We recommend talking about this in the interview. The interview is the perfect place for you to talk about your incarceration on your terms. You can explain any mitigating circumstances, and best of all, you can talk about your redemption story, how you've changed and redeemed yourself since. These are the kinds of things employers love to hear. And the place to talk about it is in the interview, not necessarily on the resume, because it's a sad fact that if you do mention incarceration on the resume, you're less likely to get the interview. If you don't mention your incarceration, there is going to be a gap in your work history. Gaps are also a red flag, so that's not great. If this is the case, you may want to use a functional template resume to disguise and play down the gap in your work history. We'll show an example of that later. It might be in your best interest, though, to go ahead and include the incarceration on your resume, because there's a chance that you have valuable work experience, education, or skills that you gained while you were in the system that would be of benefit to you on your job search. You want to talk about these things, and it's even possible that you might be able to disguise it so that you can talk about these skills and experience and education without saying the word prison. Let's look at some examples of how to do that. So, disguising your incarceration, we cover it up. How can we do that? Well, when you talk about the job that you held while you were incarcerated, you can use the name of the state or the parish rather than the name of the prison system. For example, you could say that you were a landscaper for the state of Louisiana for the past 13 years. Now that's true. If you worked as a landscaper in the prison and it was a state-run prison, you were an employee of the state government. So you can say that you worked directly for the state of Louisiana. That's not a bad thing. If it's a parish prison, you can say that you worked directly for the parish. You could say, for example, landscaper, East Baton Rouge Parish or City of Baton Rouge. That's not a bad thing. I work for the City of Baton Rouge. There are lots of people who work for the City of Baton Rouge. So that's a clever way of disguising it. You could use the name of a contract company if there was a contract company involved. A lot of prisons will contract out some of their services, especially in the kitchen department. A lot of the food and supplies are brought in by an outside contract company. If this is the case, you can use the name of that company rather than the name of the prison. For example, if you worked in the kitchen, you could say you were a cook with ACI Food Services, and no one will ever be the wiser. You could also make it look like you worked directly for the prison. This is not a strategy that will work for everyone. If the kind of work that you did in the prison is work that is clearly and solely done by prisoners, this strategy is not going to work. So if you worked in the kitchen or in the grounds maintenance crew or as a custodian for the prison, I would not recommend this approach. But if you worked in some sort of enrichment or educational capacity, if you did programs for the fellow inmates, if you ran some sort of fitness program or educational program, if you helped them with the GED classes, these are things you can talk about and just say that you were a program clerk or an educational counselor for the prison. And they will probably think that you were an outside employee who was hired to work at the prison to provide these services. Finally, if you want to use education on your resume, education that you earned while you were incarcerated, yes, do this because continuing education is a great thing to put on your resume. When you do, though, make sure that you use the name of the group that provided the education, the outside company that they had to come in and offer these classes. If it was a community college extension center, if it was a local nonprofit group, you're going to put that organization's name rather than the name of the prison. For example, here, we see that someone earned a GED through Adult Literacy Advocates in 2016. So these are ways to talk about the valuable skills and education and experience that you earned while you were incarcerated without mentioning being incarcerated. This gives you a chance to get your foot in the door so that you can talk in the interview about the incarceration on your own terms. Let's look at some of the red flags that you want to make sure you avoid on your resume. First, you want to make sure that you avoid typos. Anything that looks careless, anything that looks like you rushed through this is going to be something that you want to avoid. Get your resume proofread. We recommend by 3 people before you submit it. If you send it to 3 different people and none of them find any mistakes, you're probably good. But these mistakes might include a lot more than you'd realize. Not just misspelled words, but also improper capitalization or punctuation, run-on sentences, and formatting errors, such as if you changed fonts in the middle, if you used a different kind of bullet point, if your dates don't line up vertically, the kinds of things that make your document less pretty. Remember, pretty matters. It has to be pretty, and it has to be perfect. So get it proofread before you send it out. The next big flag is an unstable work history. This would be, for example, if you have a gap in your work history of several years when you weren't working, if you have job hopping, lots of short-term jobs, or if you have lots of jobs that didn't last very long and you had little gaps in between them, this looks unstable. This looks like you're not really committed to a job. And that might hurt you in the job search. How do you fix this? Well, there are a few different ways. As we discussed earlier, you can use work experience from within your incarceration to fill in the gap. And here are some other ideas. If it's short gaps that you want to cover, you can use just years instead of months and years for your work history. Don't say that you worked there from March 2012 through May 2012. Just say that you worked there in 2012. If it's a larger gap, do your best to fill it in with work history, with continuing education, with volunteer work. If you were active in any kind of community organization, your kids' schools, your church program, these are things that you can put on your resume as volunteer work to help fill in gaps. If you were self-employed, you definitely put that on your resume to fill in a gap. It doesn't matter if it was a tiny little job, it's still a job. What I mean by that is if you sold jewelry on Etsy for 5 hours a week, if you mowed your neighbor's lawns a couple of times a month whenever they were thinking about it, whatever it is that you did on your own that you got paid for, you're going to write that down on your resume. It's going to look like a full-time job, and it's going to cover that gap. And if you were a caretaker, if you were taking care of kids or of elderly parents, you can put that down on a resume as a job as well. If none of these strategies work and you still have a work history that looks unstable, there's a solution for that too. You can use a functional resume template. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But first, I have to talk about a different resume template, the chronological resume. I have to talk about this one first because this is the most common and most basic kind of resume, the one that most people like to use, but it's probably not a good fit for most people. A chronological resume is a simple, basic resume. It's just your work history, where you worked, when, and what you did there. I'll show you an example. This is a basic resume template from our website. It's very basic. It's just his name and contact info at the top, and then below that, where he worked, when, and what he did there. Simple, basic, easy. People love this template because it's really easy to use. You can be done in like 15 minutes. But that doesn't make it a good idea for everybody. Who is it a good idea for? Well, a basic resume is good for someone who has a steady, stable work history, doing one kind of thing that they want to keep doing. If someone has been a truck driver for 15 years and has a CDL and wants to keep on driving trucks, that person can keep things simple by just using a basic work history resume. But if you have gaps in your work history, if you have an unstable work history, if you're changing to a different kind of career, if you have any sort of problem that you're kind of trying to hide on your resume, this is probably not a good fit for you, because all it is your work history, and it's going to draw attention to those problems. Instead, I would encourage many of you to consider using a functional resume. Functional resume is kind of the opposite of chronological resume, which focuses on just your work history. A functional resume focuses mostly on your skills. Remember, we talked at the beginning about having a big list of your best skills. A functional resume lets that list shine. There's a huge section about the things you can do, the things you have to offer, the greatest highlights of your accomplishments. And then your actual work history is this itty-bitty little section down at the bottom of your resume, where they're like, please don't pay attention to this. This is not the important part. Let me show you an example of that. So this resume template is from the book Best Resumes and Letters for Ex-Offenders by Wendy Anelo and Ronald Kranich. It's a great book for any job seeker who has a criminal record. There are excellent example resumes and cover letters in there. And in general, any book that has the name Ronald Kranich attached to it is going to have valuable information for anyone with a criminal record and who's looking for a job. So, excellent book. Includes many templates, including this one. This resume for Mr. Tweed, he begins by talking about what position he's looking for as a landscaper or groundskeeper. So right away, we have an idea of who he is as an employee. And then his resume begins with a huge section on his capabilities, on his skills. He breaks these skills down into 3 big categories. And he has subheadings under each of these categories where he talks about some of the specific things he can do in each of these fields. He talks about being good at horticulture. He says that he has a broad knowledge of planting of all of these different kinds of plants. He knows how to handle soil and water and sunlight. He knows how to prevent plant diseases. All of these specific skills that he has related to the field of horticulture. He can make things grow. His next skill set is grounds maintenance. He talks about understanding topography and drainage plans, developing landscaping arrangements, turf maintenance, fertilization, irrigation, pesticides. He is great at making a lawn look beautiful. Then he talks about equipment operation, and he's very specific here about the kinds of equipment related to landscaping and groundskeeping that he knows how to use. So far, this is a very impressive resume. We clearly see that he has lots of relevant, marketable skills for the kind of job that he's applying for. If we look down at the rest of the resume, his actual work experience section is very small. He goes into a little bit of detail on his most recent job as a maintenance worker for the state of Ohio. We know what that means, but the hiring manager won't. And he briefly, very briefly, with no deeper explanation at all, mentions his prior job as an accounting manager. Below in his education section, he talks about the landscape design courses that he took through the local community college extension center. This is an excellent way of disguising education earned during incarceration. And below that, he mentions having had a bachelor's in accounting. The functional resume works very well for this person because he's having a major career change. His prior work history in education was as an accountant, but he can't do that type of work anymore. Instead, he focuses most of his resume about the skills that he learned in his new chosen profession. Very savvy way of doing it. So, the functional resume can be a great idea for handling big gaps, unstable work histories, if you're changing careers, or if you have any sort of problem that you need to cover up on your resume, because it draws attention to the good stuff that you have to offer and draws attention away from the things that might be a little questionable. But the functional template's not perfect. It's not a great idea for somebody who has a steady, stable work history. If you have a fairly solid, continuous work history doing the same kind of thing, you probably don't want a functional resume, because some hiring managers don't like them. Occasionally, a functional resume will catch a hiring manager off guard because it's very different in structure from a traditional resume that they're used to. And some online applications, the software has trouble reading a functional resume, so it might not process your application completely. There is a bit of a risk involved in a functional resume. If you don't need one, I probably wouldn't do one. But a lot of people do need one, especially people who have a criminal record and as a result of that have gaps or an unstable work history or need to change careers. Finally, let's look at the hybrid resume. The hybrid resume, also called the combination resume, is a combination of the two types of resumes we've talked about already. It's got a good work history section like the chronological resume, but it's also got a skills section like the functional resume. Not as big as the one on the functional resume, but it's got one. This kind of template works well for a lot of people by letting you focus on your marketable skills without being as extreme a solution as the functional resume. Let's take a look at an example of this. This template, again, comes to us from the book Best Resumes and Letters for Ex-Offenders by Wendy Ainelo and Ronald Kranich. This one has a skills section at the top, but it's small. It begins with a statement of what this guy wants to do. He says he's an electrician's assistant / electrician's helper. Then his little skills section includes some more detail about his skills in that area. He has progressively responsible experience as an electrician's helper. He's worked on residential and commercial projects. He mentions working on installations, repairs, troubleshooting, preventative maintenance, inspections. All of these things are very relevant to the kind of work he's applying for. Below that, we see the work experience section. It's a large section, it's an extended section, and he goes into detail about each of these jobs. This is the more traditional format that employers tend to be more comfortable with. He talks about his work as an electrician's helper for the state of California, wink wink. Previous work experience as an electrician's helper again for an outside company. Prior to that, he did maintenance work at the local zoo. But even there, he focuses on the aspects of that job that are most relevant to the electric work that he's applying for. He talks about building construction, maintenance, installing fencing, and laying down cement. These are construction, industrial-based skills that would transfer over well to the kinds of jobs he's applying for. His education includes an electrician's helper certification from the San Diego Vocational Technical Skills Center. He was very savvy and included the name of the program rather than the name of the prison where he earned the certification. So this is someone who didn't need a functional resume because once he includes his work experience while he was incarcerated, he doesn't have any big gaps. And because he did the kind of work while incarcerated that he did previously, there's a continuous thread here. His entire work history seems to be in kind of the same field, so there's not a major career change that he needs to cover up. Since he didn't need a functional resume, the hybrid resume suits him just fine. The hybrid resume can be a great way of showing off both your skills and your experience. Got the skills from the functional section, and show off your work history in that traditional format. And it looks professional without being too difficult to write. One of the problems of the functional template is that it can be a little tricky to write. However, if the hybrid resume does not do a good enough job of disguising the issues that you faced, if your hybrid resume doesn't cover up your gaps or incarceration or a major career change, you're going to want to go ahead and spring for the functional resume, which could do a better job of covering up these issues. This is the end of our presentation today. If you liked this video, please hit like. If you'd like to see more things from us like this, please hit subscribe. And if you have any questions about any of the material we covered today, please feel free to call the Career Center or come by in person to the main library at Goodwood. Thank you.